Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum, and today we've got I believe it's our 5th video about dry docking the ship. Remember, every Wednesday since we announced dry docking Battleship New Jersey, we are releasing update videos. We still have not gotten to the point where we're signing a contract yet. We still have to do a lot of fundraising to get there. We have $5 million in the bank. We need $5 million. They won't let the ship out of the yard until we have paid in full, so it's important that we have a large amount of the money before we sign any contract. Until we sign a contract, we don't have a date, and until we have a date, we don't know when we're going to be there. We're only planning on being there for about 60 days, so the museum would be closed for about 3 months tops. So it might take a week or two ahead of time and after to get things set up for the tow. Importantly, I have not said this before, I don't think, which has led to some people coming up with their own answers. We plan on bringing the battleship back here. I didn't say that because it never crossed my mind. Of course we're going to bring it back here to where all of our infrastructure is. And it seems like people on the internet have been running wild with, I haven't seen where they're taking the ship, so that must mean they're taking it to all sorts of weird stuff. And maybe that's because Texas is not going back to where she started. But probably 99 out of 100 museum ships get out of dry docking and go back to where they started. We certainly plan to. So, all of that out of the way, one of the earliest things we have to plan for in dry docking the ship is getting under the Walt Whitman Bridge to get to the Navy Yard or wherever else we may have to take the ship. So with all that out of the way, today we're going to talk about calculating the air draft. One of the first things that we have to do is calculate the ship's air draft, and we're going to talk about how to do that today. This is one of the first steps towards moving the ship because we have to ensure that she'll fit under the Walt Whitman Bridge. So, this is a math-heavy episode. I'm sorry, you guys. The Walt Whitman Bridge is 150 feet above average high tide. There is an average tidal shift of about 6 feet. So the max clearance of the Walt Whitman Bridge is about 156 feet. We want to make sure we have some wiggle room, so if at all possible, we're going to go under the bridge at low tide, and we want about 5 feet of clearance between what we calculate the air draft to be and what the height of the bridge is. We don't want to get anybody nervous by getting too close. So, the draft of the ship, normal draft, is the distance from the waterline to what's called the baseline, the bottom of the ship. And for today's video, I've got the ship's booklet of general plans. This booklet of general plans is at 1/192nd scale, which means that 1/16 of an inch on a ruler equals 1 foot on the plan. So that makes it really easy to measure things out and figure out exactly how tall they are. So, the depth of the river, this is also important, is about 40 feet in the shipping channel. Another early step that we've undergone is a hydrographic survey. So we've basically measured the seafloor between the ship and the channel to make sure there's room for us to get her out of here. And we might talk about that in a future video. I don't have the full report yet to be able to talk about that more, but I do have all the information I need to talk about air draft, so we might be doing this a little bit out of sequence. So, we got 40 feet in the channel. Fully loaded, an Iowa-class battleship draws about 38 feet of water. So, we should be in good shape. Now remember, we're going out at low tide so that we can get under the bridge with as much clearance as possible. The ship is not fully loaded today. So our draft is not 38 feet. So the first thing that we have to calculate is what is the ship's draft today. So that entails looking at the draft markers on the bow and the stern of the ship. Now you notice there are numbers on both ends. Each number represents a foot. So when the water level is at the very top of that number, it is that many feet down. Now often you'll only see a single number until you get to the 10 mark, So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 0. And then it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 20, 2, 0, and then blah, 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 blah. So looking at it, we know that we're somewhere in the 30s, most of the places. So looking at these draft markings, we are drawing about 34 feet at the stern. We're close to fully loaded back there. But we're only drawing 23 foot 9 inches at the bow. We have the armored box around the steering gear at the stern of the ship. That is permanent weight that doesn't get removed. But all of the stuff that would be providing weight at the bow, the fuel, the dry stores, ammunition in turrets 1 and 2, those aren't there. So the ship is about 10 feet out of trim. This is a problem for 2 reasons. With the ship out of trim like this, it means that the draft of the ship roughly amidships where the mast is, so about 440 feet back in the 860 foot waterline length of the ship, means that we draw about 29 feet 6 inches right now amidships. And we're going to come back to the draft and being out of trim in a minute. That number is critical because on the blueprints here, it tells us how tall the ship is to the top of the mast. 207 foot 7 inches above baseline. Remember, baseline is to the very bottom of the ship. So we've got to subtract the draft from that number to get how tall the ship is nowadays, which is about 162 feet tall. Remember, the Walt Whitman Bridge is 150 feet and we want about 5 feet of clearance, so we're looking to get her down to about 145 feet of height. So, now we've calculated the draft of the ship, we've subtracted that from the height of the ship that's in the booklet of general plans, and that has given us our air draft. Now we have to see what we have to remove to get the ship to about 145 feet of air draft. Our first problem is we cannot go into dry dock 10 feet out of trim. It means when the dry dock is pumped out, the ship will sit down on her stern first and then pivot those 10 feet as the water continues to come out. That's not great for the ship. She may not even be able to get over the sill of the dry dock drag racing like that. So we have to level the ship out to within a couple of feet of trim. I believe Missouri got her within 2 feet of trim when they went into dry dock in 2009. In order to do that, they had to put approximately 2,000 tons of water in the tanks at the bow of the ship to bring the bow down. At that point, we would have about a 34-foot draft at the stern, about a 32-foot draft at the bow, and about a 33-foot draft amidship. So just by doing that, we've bought ourselves about 4 feet of draft. So now we're at 158. We still have a ways to go. So in order to make sure we can get below the bridge, just like when they brought the ship under the bridge here the first time, we have to make sure that some of the critical equipment from on top of the platform is removed. So the ship has a tripod above the superstructure. It's got a flat platform on top of it. On top of that flat platform is a mast and a couple of radar antennas. The mast has to be cut off. It was before, and we can see the cut marks on the mast from where it was cut and re-welded after the ship had been brought here. So cutting off the mast removes all that height, and now we just have to worry about the height of the radar antenna, which is about 169 feet above baseline when you measure it with your 1/16 of an inch here. So the radar antenna has to come off as well. When the ship was first brought here, she didn't have an SPS-49 air search radar. So that was added later by the museum. It wasn't on the ship in mothballs, so we're going to have to take that off. Fortunately, it's not like the mast where we have to cut it. It's only bolted on. So we can unbolt the antenna from its platform. that almost gets us where we need to be. The pedestal that it sits on has enough clearance, and the surface search radar forward of it is lower than the height of the clearance, so that is fine. However, there are a pair of dipoles listed here as AS 3077 SP on the starboard side and AS 3079 SP on the port side. So again, those are some antenna type structures that are bolted on to the yards there that would be too high. So those are going to have to come down as well. So that brings up the next question. Pumping water into the tanks, probably easy. We'll almost certainly do a video about that in the near future as we get there. But removing the antennas from the top of the mast when they're 170 feet above water, how do we do that? We'd have to bring in a crane. The problem is a crane that can pick the mast from that high is going to have a pretty wide base to spread out to make sure it's stable, especially since we're estimating we're going to remove something like 25 tons from the top of the platform. That's not going to do much to our draft markings, but it is a lot of weight for this crane to be moving. So the crane has to be able to carry that weight. And the problem is our pier is not wide enough for one of these heavy cranes to come and sit there and spread its base out. So we can't use a landside crane here on our pier. We also looked into lifting this stuff off with a helicopter. We knew the radar antenna was put on there by a heavy lift helicopter, but we haven't been able to find a helicopter that can lift the mast. It seems like helicopters, at least the commercially available ones, max out at about 10 tons of lift. And again, we're looking at up to 25 tons that we have to remove. And we certainly don't want to cut everything into pieces to get it off of there. We'd like to do it in one go. So, helicopter's out, crane on our pier is out. We can bring a barge crane in, but that will be about 10 times as expensive for the right size barge crane as getting a traditional landside crane driven up. So what we're looking at right now is moving the Battleship to another pier on this side of the bridge so that we can remove some of these fittings using a crane that has enough room to lift there. Now, the port next door has some cranes for unloading cargo, but none of them lift high enough. But they do have a broad enough pier that if we get permission to tie up there, that's probably our first choice. So, real early planning processes here. We don't have anything affirmative. We don't have a crane company. We don't have permission from the pier. But if we had our choice, probably the easiest thing to do would be to do this move in stages. And one day we move the ship from our pier less than a quarter mile down the river, tie up at another pier, bring in the crane. It's probably going to be a day-long evolution to cut the mast off and remove it. And so you can see why we're going to be shut down for at least a week prior to going into dry dock so we can do some of this stuff. And then once that has been removed, then we can do another tug the next day and move down the river to the actual Navy Yard. So again, real early stages. That may not be at all what we're doing. You've at least now seen our thought process and how you calculate all of this stuff out for a ship and why it's important to know where the ship can go. So people ask pretty frequently, well, why don't you just, if you're going to flood tanks already to bring the bow of the ship down, why don't you just flood her so that she can be able to fit under there? Again, the maximum depth of the river is about 40 feet in the shipping channel, so we cannot bring the ship down low enough by taking on additional weight to get under the bridge. We have to remove some of the top hamper to be able to do that. Unfortunately, these masts don't have any sort of rigging to them or anything else like that, so it's relatively easy to get them supported by a crane, cut them off or unbolt them, and then hoist them off the ship. But again, this is just one small part of the project, getting the ship ready just to make it under the bridge so we can head to the yard. So you're starting to get an impression of how complex dry docking the Battleship is. Once we get her into dry dock, It's the easiest thing in the world. I've said it before. All we're doing is painting the bottom of the ship. It's just what the Navy calls a shave in the haircut. So it's relatively simple. It's the dry dock's bread and butter. But getting the battleship there from where we are is going to be complicated. And doing it on a timetable that matches up with the yard availability is also going to be complex. So, what are some other questions you guys have about dry docking the ship? Every Wednesday we're going to continue to release videos about dry docking the ship. Some of our future videos are going to be about some of the major projects we hope to accomplish. Last week we talked about repacking the gland seals. In a future one we might talk about our plans for painting the ship or replacing the anodes on the ship. Inspecting places that are known class issues is probably going to be a future video as well. But we'll probably also do at least one video in the future that's just questions and answers. So if you guys have any questions about the dry docking, let us know in the comment section down below, or go over to my Facebook page and shoot a message there, and we'll add it to our list so that we can answer it either in its own video or in a future dry docking episode. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. I'm really blown away by the amount of support you guys have given us so far to be able to go into dry dock. And if you would like to continue donating to support this major capital project, there's a link in the description below to donate specifically to the dry docking project. We really appreciate your support. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find about the museum, our channel, and this project. Thanks for watching.